Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here today in the room and online. We have a wonderful event planned for today. I'm Kara Sklar. I direct our early and elementary education policy program here at New America. Oh, success! The day's already going well. New America is dedicated to renewing, reimagining, and realizing the promise of America in an era of rapid technological and social change. And today, we focus on the promise of public education. First, I want to give thanks. Thank you to our partners at Children's Equity Project and to our funders who have joined us today from Trust for Learning. And I also want to thank our huge team of people who are making this event possible in the back, the production, events, and comms teams, my colleagues Erin Lowenberg and Lauren Bornfriend, and all of you for being here, and all of our speakers for joining us, both in person and online. I also want to thank Ruby Takanishi, who is a visionary in our field and who we lost a few years ago. Ruby was a former New America Fellow and one of our country's leaders in pre-K to third grade education. Ruby once wrote, "The schools we have today are a product of the last century. It's time to put our generation to the test, by designing a system that will help all of our youngest learners realize their educational potential. Talent is universally distributed. Opportunities to develop that talent are not." It's Ruby's call to action that drives our event today. Each child deserves an early learning experience that is engaging and joyful, that instills a lifelong love of learning. We have a great event today. We're excited to launch our new framework with the Children's Equity Project that puts equity and joy at the center of elementary education. We have a wonderful presentation of our framework by our partners at CEP, followed by a great panel with parents, teachers, and leaders. And to start us off, we'll hear opening remarks from our country's Deputy Assistant Secretary of Policy and Early Learning, Swati Adarkar, to put this work in the context of larger federal movement. With leadership from Secretary Cardona, Ms. Adarkar has worked to bring attention and resources to bear on the pre-K to third continuum. So please join me in welcoming our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Adarkar.
Thank you, Kara, and New America for that wonderful, warm welcome. I'm delighted to join you today. For one thing, this occasion provides me an opportunity personally to acknowledge New America for its steadfast support and important contribution to the development of the department's early learning agenda, and especially the kindergarten Sturdy Bridge work that I have had the honor to lead. Months before my arrival at the department, New America, in partnership with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, has provided field-wide thought and action leadership that has made such a difference to all aspects of this work. Thank you so much for this collaboration. Being here today also affords me the opportunity, on behalf of my department colleagues, to thank Chantel Meek and the Children's Equity Project for participating in our department's internal learning series. It's been so wonderful to have this chance to see this work evolve and come to fruition. And I'm especially delighted at the recent announcement that happened at the end of September that acknowledged a new award made to establish the Center for Early School Success, awarded to the Children's Equity Project at Arizona State University in collaboration with an amazing group of folks, the Buffett Early Childhood Institute at the University of Nebraska, the Center X Mathematics Project at UCLA, the California Reading and Literature Project, the Department of Special Education at the University of Oregon, and New America, where we are today, have all been awarded this grant to do this work over 5 years. And we so look forward to the launch of this center, which in partnership with the regional centers will provide universal, targeted, and intensive capacity building services designed to support state and local educational agencies to implement comprehensive and aligned preschool through third grade early learning systems. And I know that my colleague from the department, Melissa Castillo, who's joining me here today, who is leading our multilingual initiative, is equally excited about the new Center on English Learners and Multilingualism. Thank you, Melissa, for joining me today. It's so encouraging to see the early learning community come together to elevate the importance of the early elementary grades. My time at the U.S. Department of Education has made me even more appreciative of Dr. Barbara Bowman, her insistent and persistent reminder that the span of early childhood begins at birth, and it includes the elementary grades. It remains such an important contribution to the field. Barbara's vision is a driver for my work at the department to build the kindergarten year into a more sturdy bridge from the early years to and through the early grades. I admire the ambition of learning, joy, and equity, the report that brings us all together today. The Children's Equity Project and New America have assembled a distinguished group of authors to challenge us all, to challenge us first to imagine that young learners, including and especially students who are low income, children of color, have a home language other than English, or may have delays or disabilities, can be engaged in joyful learning and experiencing early school success. And they challenge us to make that aspiration a reality. Moreover, the report does so much more than issue the challenge. This report anticipates and builds out what those of us working to advance early school success have been identifying as the enabling conditions for success. Drawing upon science and practice, the authors of this report have incorporated and elevated the conditions into a robust framework, a roadmap toward early school success for all children, including those who are too often left behind. In closing, I want to recall the words of Dr. Ruby Takanishi, who Kara mentioned as well, who was my longtime mentor, big sister, and as Kara said, a former senior research fellow at New America. There were two things she said that I keep holding in my mind as we do this work. We've got to reduce the chaos at the schoolhouse door to create that smooth on-ramp for children to begin their formal schooling. And we cannot forget, as Kara said, talent is universal, but opportunity, sadly, is not. Our work honors Ruby when we find ways to create opportunities to develop and unleash the talent of our youngest learners. This report invites us to do just that. And I, on behalf of all of us, am so grateful to the two funders who supported this report, Trust for Learning and Heising Simons. I'm so much looking forward to today's conversation, and thank you for inviting me to be with you.
Thank you so much, Swati and Kara. I'm so excited to be here with you all. And I love that we're talking about Ruby. And I was just remembering she partnered with us and read the very first CEP report that ever went out. And I also have her in my head a lot as we continue this work forward. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for the opportunity. Thank you to the funders and to New America and all our partners. I was just telling Swati and Melissa as we were sitting down, thank you, Biden administration, for putting the early grades on the map in a really serious way, in a really intentional way, and for giving us the opportunity and space and funding to do all this work. I was telling Tanette that we should have put up our selfie because we were at the airport together when we found out. And we were jumping up and down like we had personally just won like $10 million ourselves. But we are very excited and so ready to do this work and to build out this framework and make it reality. So we don't have a ton of time. It's like many CEP reports, kind of pretty thorough. It's a little bit long, and I invite you all to take a look at it, but we're gonna drive you over some big points and some context setting, and then I'm gonna hand it to my colleague, Dr. Powell, who's gonna drive you through each of the 14 ingredients briefly, and then we're gonna go to our panel. So we started putting this together, and I will say it's not an accident, I think, that this report kind of tracked with my own kids' shift and transition from the early childhood space into elementary school. I have a first grader now, and it has been a journey, and even though I'm in this early childhood work and I've heard people talk about the kindergarten transition, blah, 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 it is such a hard transition going through it as a parent and having all of these different pieces in mind. And so I know Dr. Powell has, similar experiences with her boys that hopefully she'll share a little bit about. But we wanted to drill down, what are these core ingredients, right? We started off talking about an ideal. What's the ideal elementary? Doesn't exist. But what are the core ingredients at the foundation that every kid deserves access to, right? And we kind of landed on a few of these different pieces that we built out the ingredients from. And the first piece is joy, right? Joyful learning. If anybody has ever known a baby or had a baby or worked with a baby or with a young child, right? We know they are excited to learn naturally. It's so cliche why we say this, they're born natural scientists, but they are, right? The questions, the pointing, the gestures, the excitement in learning and discovering new things that as we grow up as adults don't even notice, right? But where do we lose that along the way, right? And how do we set the conditions to keep that alive? That natural scientist piece doesn't end when they turn 5, doesn't end when they enter kindergarten or first grade or second or third, right? With the right conditions, we can actually foster this natural curiosity that we have and make learning fun and engaging, because it is, right? But somehow we've sucked the fun out of it, right? In so many instances, and disproportionately for Black and brown children from lower income settings, and so on. So how do we do that? How do we get back to that? How do we make it based on development, right? Equity at the foundation. And we'll talk a little bit about this in the next slide, right? Our education systems were built to be exclusive, not inclusive, right? At their very core, right? And that has been a pattern that has evolved and changed over time, and we still see lots of remnants of it today and manifestations of it today that we'll talk about. But how do we acknowledge that and then actively act, right, to undo that and to build more inclusive spaces that focus on that? Child-centered, right? I love Ruby's quote, right, that our schools were built for the last century, right? And so often our schools are built based on adults' needs and not around children's development and needs. And so how do we build classrooms and buildings and pedagogy and instruction and assessment and all these different pieces that actually are child-centered, right? And that piece. And of course, again, where I started, there is no ideal because we have to be flexible enough to community context, to parent choice, to parent goals, to family context and priorities. And so how do we create these base conditions that are flexible enough, right, for that community context, for that parent and family choice? So last year, I was part of a National Academy's report that we published on the opportunity gap. And we reviewed all the things that there are to review, all the research, all the data, historically, contemporarily, looking at those inequities and the drivers of them, looking at systemic racism and how that's manifested through early ed, through K-12 education, and what that looks like, right? And then connecting it to today, right? What are the educational disparities we see today? We talk a lot about discipline. We talk a lot about the segregation of students with disabilities. That still is a legal, form of segregation that exists in this country. We talk about English learners and multilingual students, right? And how, in my state, sadly, right, there is still segregation of English learners and English-only laws on the books. And so we talk about none of these things happened yesterday, right? They all have their roots in yesterday. But they continue to manifest today, and they continue to exist, and now we have the National Academy seal, official seal, to say we have reviewed everything and these things exist, and they are rooted in systemic racism and other inequities from history that continue today. So the framework, I feel like I should lift the curtain. Here are the 14 different ingredients that we talk about. So Tanette's gonna take us through each of those, but it's wide-ranging. Right? And I will say that in putting this together, we read a lot of research, we looked at a lot of data, we convened a lot of groups, including parents, including educators, including policy people, including researchers, to bring together this concept of what is, as we call it in early childhood, we say high quality, right? What is the core group of essentials for the early grades? And it spans everything, right? We look at architecture, facilities, color, landscaping, everything from the physical environment to the teacher piece, right? Diverse teachers, qualified teachers, what does teacher evaluation look like? Assessment, pedagogy, instruction, dual language education, right? And ensuring that dual language education, right, if we're talking about high quality elementary, it necessarily includes that as a piece of it. And so we talk about health, right, and healthy food. Have you guys seen school lunches lately, right? And ensuring, like, it doesn't have to be that way, right? It should be food that we all find appetizing, that we all want to eat. It should be healthy. Remember, my kid got, like, chocolate muffins and, like, Cocoa Puffs and, like, chocolate milk all in one meal, right, for breakfast, for her school breakfast. She loved it. She was super excited about it. But, like, that's, you know, so thinking about all these dimensions, right? And so when we visited schools, we visited a number of schools, including some of the schools, I don't know where Dr. Robert is, but he'll be on the panel later today, that were doing amazing and innovative things, right? But I think once we saw lots of schools, we reflected on our own kids' experiences, on our own growing up, nobody is doing the full package, right? There are schools that are doing an amazing job with dual language, but they might be in a crumbling facility. There are schools that have these beautiful, state-of-the-art, amazing facilities and like terrible school climate discipline policies, right? There are others who are doing maybe a handful of things, but the full package is, I think, what we're after, because you deserve all the things, right? Our kids deserve all of the things. And so putting this together as a package and being like, all right, we need all of the things, and you've got these 5, great, let's work on the next 5, right? Because just doing one cool thing or 2 cool things aligned with the research isn't enough for our kids. So with that, I'm gonna hand it to my colleague, Dr. Powell, to drive us through a very little shallow dive on each of the 14.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Can y'all see me over the podium? All right. Well, all right. So I am going to give you a very quick, right, run through of the 14. I encourage everyone to check out the report. It's been a labor of love and necessity, right? And when we thought about this report, I'm reminded of, the question of how are the children, right? And so when we thought about this framework, it was really this idea and belief that if we did this, and we did this well, then we knew what our answer would be to that question, that the children would be well. So we thought the first 2 of the core ingredients were the most important: transformative leadership and a vision and philosophy. So when we think about transformative leadership, I'm thrilled because we have on our panel today some transformative leaders. But really this idea that leaders who wanted to lean into that history, right, lean into inequity, because before we can talk about equity, we have to be willing to name inequity and to really, really wrestle with the history of where we've been, but to also be able to dream about what we want for young people and the people who care for young people every day. So second, that vision and philosophy, just really, again, not losing the principles and cores of what we know to be true, that joy is important. Right? That it's not just, here where we go to, to learn or to memorize and some of those things, but we are really engaged in who young people are and who they're becoming. And we thought that if you had those 2 things, that transformative leadership and a vision and philosophy that was just rooted in joy and anti-racism, right? And all of these core things, that you would be able to do the rest of these ingredients, right? That you would need those 2 first. So number 3, we have explicit attention to the experiences and outcomes of children from historically marginalized communities. Again, we have to be willing to grapple with inequity in our society, right? When we look at a lot of the things that we see today, like Dr. Meek said, our school systems were designed to be exclusive and not inclusive. And so because we know that and we recognize that, we have to be willing to think about what that means, not only for the young people, but for their families and their communities. Going on, that we believe, a lot of times when we talk about universal design, we think about students with disabilities. And we thought, right, like I'm a firm believer, and I know our team at the CEP, that what is good for children with disabilities is good for all children. And so applying a universal design across every aspect of schooling, we thought was essentially important. And blended pedagogies, right? So really being able to think about how we are child-centered, right, in our pedagogy, how it is culturally sustaining, right? And so again, like not trying to strip people of who they are. And I'll tell you, one example that kind of sticks out in my head, and I won't give a lot. Chantel said, talk about your kids. We have no time for that today. But I will tell you, I have 3 sons, and it has been quite the journey. But when my middle son was in 1st grade, he was working on a short essay. And he put that he wanted to dunk on them boys. And I'm a basketball fan. So for me, I was like, that's the perfect sentence. You said it right. But his teacher had no idea what he was talking about. And she changed the sentence to, I shoot the shot. Well, it's completely different. Dunking and shooting are not the same thing, right? I mean, I'll never dunk. I'm short. However, as a huge basketball fan, like there is a big difference. Right, so just having some of that understanding, just as a brief example, because I know we don't have a ton of time, but again, making sure that when we think about all of, that yes is, informed by development and the science, right, of what we know young people need and where they are, but also making sure that they don't have to strip themselves of who they are and all of the knowledge and expertise that they and their communities bring. Next one is research-informed, community-relevant, individualized instruction, and interdisciplinary curricula. It is a lot, right? It is a mouthful, but each of those is very, very important, right? I'm a researcher, so we want to make sure that we are using the best research that we have access to, but that it is community relevant. Right, that there also, right, is knowledge there, that there's history there, that there have been work done in communities that we need to continue with, and also that it's individualized. Right, something that we think is important is every child should have an IEP, right? A learning plan that really, because we all learn differently, we learn in different ways. It's not just about ability and disability, it's just the fact that, we learn in different ways, we think in different ways, we communicate in different ways. How do we bring that to the classroom? And not only with what we do with young people, but what we do to teachers as well, right? There's never gonna be a one-size-fits-all with any of this. And so if we can think about that, we feel like it's incredibly important. I'm gonna keep on going because I want to keep us on time, but dual language education is something that, as Chantel said, like it's incredibly important for us where we feel like, we live in a multilingual society, right? We live somewhere where people speak many, many languages, and there's so much goodness and greatness and joy in having that language. If you can speak language in your community, they ought not come to school and have that stripped away from them. Right, be forced to just, speak in English, learn in English, test in English. That we ought to say, like, what are the languages in your community and how do we bring that in? How do we bring that knowledge? And how do we make sure that across our curriculum and offerings that we see that language present in all of its ways? And so we think this is essential. And we have done a lot of work around dual language education. So there's other reports that you can read as well. Child grouping. This is one that, we know it's absolutely one of the areas where teachers know, like if you have a classroom of 25, it's gonna be very hard to do the work that we're asking, right? It's gonna be very hard to do the work that wakes teachers up and get them excited about the work. So how do we think about how children are grouped with class sizes, but also how do we think about things like looping, right? And so what does it look like for kids to spend multiple years with a teacher, as an example, right? What does it look like for there to be multi-age grouping? We see some, we see Montessori models and others. We have research that showed just how important and powerful it is. And with this ingredient, we're saying, let's listen to it, right? Let's think about that. A well-prepared and fully supported diverse teacher workforce. I've been very fortunate to work with teachers all across the country, and we know that, like, if teachers are not well, that answer to, and how are the children, we already know the answer, right? And so we have to invest in them. We want it to be a diverse group. Our teachers are to reflect the world that we live in, the communities that we live in. And we also ought to make sure that they're prepared. I cannot tell you, just a tidbit about my kids. So my oldest 2 sons were suspended from preschool when they were 3 and 4. And as they got older, I would often ask, I would meet with teachers and I would say, who's heard of implicit bias, right? And they'd be like, hands down. Who's heard of, like, who's grappled with, who knows the data around, these disparities around suspension and expulsion, whether it was early childhood or K through 12, hands down. Right, again, they're not prepared. And it's not on them, it's on us, right? That if we collectively, like we ask a lot of teachers, and we focus so much on curriculum that may not matter, because if I don't know you, I can't teach you, right? If I'm not connected to you, if I don't have an understanding of all of the things, right, that got us to this place, if I don't know the history of education, it's gonna be hard for us to teach in the way that we think matters. And so we must make sure that they're well prepared and they're also fully supported. We have to think about the well-being. Do you have time to plan, right? Like, do you have time to collaborate? Do you have time to feel that joy that we want kids to have as well? Those are some of the things. I could go on. You're going to see where I'm like super passionate, and I'm going to remind myself to move on. But this next piece, the culturally grounded, authentic family and community engagement, I promise I won't take a ton of time. We have a panelist on here who is going to handle that part that I have no doubt about. But this is an important part, and a lot of times, you know, in this work, parents are positioned as the problem. Right? That if we can just save these kids from their parents, their communities, right? Like that's how the work is typically approached. And so we kind of push against that, right? Like every school should be a community school, even if not in how we use that term, but like every school belongs to the community. Therefore, they belong to not only the children that go there, but they belong to the families and communities. And so how do we get to that? How do we think about the different offerings that we have, the way we move in space, how we balance, right, between having safe schools and schools that welcome families regularly? I won't stay there, y'all, but we will be doing more of these in the new year where we go deeper into each of these. So yes. But a school climate, right, that really embraces children's identities, right, embraces who they are, combats racism and bias and prioritizes their mental health and well-being, right? Again, these things take time, but you can walk into a school and know, where did we make up that kids have to be walking in a single file line with their hands behind their back or one hand over their mouth? Like, what is that preparing them for? It didn't prepare them for my work, right? It didn't prepare them probably for a lot of folks, you know, that are with us. So what are we preparing young people for? That school climate becomes incredibly important. What are the policies? Right, the policies around hair, right, the policies around so many of these things that continue to push kids out, how we think about behavior, right? Again, this is the school climate that we're talking about. 12, and Chantel talked about food. Food is always a hot topic at my house because, you know, I want to know what my kids ate or didn't eat or what, you know, schools served that day. But really just thinking about, yes, the nutrition that we know we can do better, right? We know that kids, like, I don't know why we just don't have fruit all the time for kids. Why we started forcing them to drink milk when we know a large number of Black communities are lactose intolerant, right? Like, it's just certain things of like, why did you just have water there? We know what's good and what's healthy for us, but it's not always available in schools. And so again, thinking about recess, how much time do kids get to play and move, right? We talk about the transition, right, into kindergarten, and we know that there's less movement, right, just a few months after you've turned 5, and that's not healthy, but it's also not healthy for kids even as you get older, you know, and so just thinking about play in this piece and opportunities to just be well. How do we get, you know, outside more? All right, so number 13, child, classroom, and school level data, right? That data is incredibly important, but a lot of times we don't use data to improve, right? We might not know how to use data. We might not capture the data that's important. But how do we capture data that we actually use for improvement? How do we work through that, right? Like, how do we think about, you know, who we are, how we show up, some of the biases? A lot of times people will say, you know, data is neutral, and it's like, it's absolutely not, right? Like, we can make numbers say whatever we want. We can push them in ways. How do we think about that in this work? And how do we make sure that it is linguistically valid? So how we even assess kids, right? When we think about the data. I have a son, and this is the last story I'll tell, I promise. But I have my youngest son. He is going through a process right now where we think he has dysgraphia. That's what we think he has. And so he has a hard time putting his writing, expressing himself through through his handwriting. And he had a recent essay that he had to turn in, and he got to type it. And he got 100 on that essay. And so the ideas and the thoughts are there. But if you're just gonna, you know, if the data that you're collecting is all by hand, it's gonna be a very hard time. Every time I get an email from a teacher, I couldn't read his handwriting. Well, did you ask him? Right? Did you figure out another way? And again, we can do this. We know we can. And so we're pushing with this framework to say, let's do it. That we know that kid not only has the ideas there, but he does know how to express them as well if we find another measure. So last but not least, this is probably hardest for schools because this is the one that's the most out of our control. But that's why we're having this conversation collectively. And it's around the spaces. I had a child, I had my middle son. I said I was going to tell the last story. Last one, I promise. Last one, I promise. But it's good to me, and I text this to Dr. Meek because my son, my middle son has been in 2 types of schools in the last 2 years. So he went to a private school last year, and this year he's back at a public school where we prefer him to be. And he said, I said, how was your first week of school? You know, I'm talking to him. I always ask my kids a lot of questions, and he said, everything was great. The teachers are great. The kids are great. Everything is great except with the building. It's like they didn't even try. And it's like, think about that, right? We did so many of these things right. He knows good teaching, right? He knows what good peers look like. He's having great interactions. He's even enjoying the school lunch, right? He is. But he said it's like they didn't even try. So again, how do we make sure that we're putting that effort in there? Because kids know. They know the difference between a school and a children's museum, right? They know the difference between many of these things. We come into spaces and we are inspired, and then we go to schools and we're reminded of prisons and jails. We got to fix it. So that's okay. So what I will say is that this sounds beautiful in theory, right? And it's easy to be inspired and say, yeah. Well, that's why we have the panel here, because it's not just about theory. It's also about practice. And so we're going to transition to our panel, and I just want to remind people, I'm always reminded of Robin Kelly's words, a scholar out of UCLA who said, without new visions, we don't know what to create, only what to tear down. And so believe me, I've dedicated my life to being able to name that inequity. But in our ability to dream and to imagine something else, that's how we're going to move ourselves forward. And so today's panel is going to help us do that. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Bornfriend and very happy to be here with all of you this afternoon. I'm a fellow here with the Education Policy Program at New America. And I'm going to introduce our panelists for today in just a moment. But first, I want to thank Chantel and Tanette for digging into the ingredients. Also, Swati and Kara, thank you for your comments. And I would also like to, I heard Ruby Takanishi brought up quite a bit. And, you know, as a pioneer of this work and a mentor to many of us, and her focus on the importance of pre-K third education, really reimagining that primary education, want to add my thanks to her and her memory. A little over a year ago, Chantel and I started talking, and I was sharing some of the commonalities I was seeing across many kindergarten classrooms and primary classrooms that I was visiting, and you know, thought that maybe there was a set of, you know, key components that we could really highlight across these places. And as it turned out, Chantel, Tanette, and the Children's Equity Project were already engaged in that work and really comprehensive framework, and invited you know, me and New America to really join with them, which it was really an honor to be a co-author with the Children's Equity Project on the 14 ingredients and the framework that you heard about today, for really designing the child-centered, joyful experiences and spaces that every child needs and deserves in their elementary education. For several years, I've visited more than 30 kindergarten classrooms in roughly 13 states, and right now, too many classrooms. There are good examples out there. There's great things happening. We're going to hear about them shortly. There are too many classrooms and schools that do not exemplify the ingredients, where joy, learning, and equity are really just missing entirely. And as Chantel said, every child deserves this. Every child needs what's included in the framework, and we've got to figure out how to operationalize and make it happen. Some of the reasons has to do with state, local, federal policies. This is something I think a lot about. Teachers and schools, they shouldn't have to do this work alone. They shouldn't have to think about how to create these rich and joyful experiences on their own. District officials, state officials, federal officials, they play a significant role in how to accelerate, enable, sustain, or really inhibit progress on making and realizing the ingredients. And so we're going to, hear a little bit more about the kinds of policy enablers that might be in place at different levels to help good work happen at the very local level. We're also going to dig much deeper into what these ingredients look like in action in real schools, in real places, real children's lives. I am once again honored to be here with our panel today, and so let me start by introducing, we have Carrie Rodriguez, co-founder, founding president of the National Parents Union. Our online speaker, we'll go there. I'd like to invite Dr. Letitia Johnson-Davis, founder of NIA Knowledge Network and the former principal of Baldwin Hills Elementary School in Los Angeles, California. We also have Dr. Michael Robert, superintendent of Osborne School District from Phoenix, Arizona. Next to him, we have Ambar Martinez, a teacher here in the District of Columbia Public Schools. And then finally, we have Patricia Donati, also a teacher here in District of Columbia Public Schools. So join me in welcoming our panelists. So I'd like to start the conversation off with a reflection. What really resonated most with you from what you've read or heard about the 14 ingredients? And think of one or two that you really want to highlight. Ambar, let's start with you.
Yeah, for me, it was the duality of education, just ensuring that kids that are from dual language backgrounds have a space that looks like home at school, but then also students that don't have a duality can come together and can see how these worlds really come together just by learning a language or learning something different from another country or place that may not be known to them, just bridging that world together.
Great. Michael?
I was really focused on the one aspect that talked about health and nutrition and movement. It's a lot of the work that we've been focused on in our district. Two things in particular, when we look at the movement of students. We've been working with the city of Phoenix for having more bike lanes, within our district so kids can get to school safely. Trying to get rid of all those nasty emissions that are going up in the air and polluting the air by having an electrified fleet. So that's been a really big part, within the transportation side. On the nutrition side, our child nutrition department is truly, truly amazing. With a couple partnerships, one with the Lifetime Foundation, which has really tried to eliminate 7 unhealthy elements from child lunches, hormone-laden meats, artificial sweeteners, artificial flavorings, bleached flour, those types of things, eliminating that, through clean label initiatives. And also working with the Blue Watermelon Project, which is a group of chefs and entrepreneurs and community activists that are looking to help reform relationships that we have with food and bringing that to parents, communities, our kids. Really want to highlight, the work of our child nutrition department and all operations. If you go on to Instagram and look at Nutrilicious Osborne, that's nutritious and delicious. I promote that not only because you'll see beautiful lunches and amazing things that our kids are eating, but if it's something that we can share with other schools, that's fantastic. And if there are things that other schools and districts see, that could be our next step. I want to hear from them too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Letitia, let's go to you online.
Was an awesome principle, and that was given to me as a keychain, so I'm reminded of it often, and it's so very true. For the school leader really holds the school community in their hands. The school leader has the unique gift and truly a sacred responsibility of nurturing reflective and progressive conversations that center the humanity of children first, their development, their growth, their achievement, their unfoldment, and having that discussion across all stakeholder groups. and keeping that vision of what the baby's greatness looks like, and the children then having ongoing opportunities towards tapping into that to the best of our abilities at the school, keeping that front and center year after year. Making decisions from a social justice lens, centering the humanity as well as the marginalization or historical marginalization and oppression of communities of color, is the charge of a transformational school leader. And we're battling systemic racism and inequitable practices and outcomes that have impacted generations within our communities. So we don't really have time to convince a school leader that we deserve a loving, just schooling experience for our babies. It really frames the way that a leader goes about his or her work, and it being the first indicator in the framework, I think is perfect that it's front and center.
Thank you, Letitia. Carrie.
So my most important title is actually being Matthew, Miles, and David's mom. And that is why I'm here today. And it's my honor to represent about 1.7 million families in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. And on behalf of all of those families, we are deeply grateful to be welcomed into a conversation where we can move relationships from being transactional to transformational. Because at the National Parents Union, all of these different organizations are coming together to say what we would like to do as parents and families is to be a part of the solution. But by being treated with dignity and respect as key critical stakeholders, that is how we move from just merely having transactions with us, wanting us to engage on whatever terms have been set up by a system, and instead wanting to be in deep relationship with us so that we can actually get our kids to the outcomes that we all collectively desire, is really where we want to be. So it is deeply moving for us to be part of a conversation where that is acknowledged as being a key part of the solution, because often it's an afterthought. Even in the way, you take a look at school budgets, it's often, just the thing that gets cut first, the thing that is, a nice to have instead of a necessity, and the way that we view this as being a critical part of how we actually come to solutions for our kids. So I think, our reflection is that we really want to make sure that we embark on a conversation that is rooted in an asset mindset around parents and families, which is included in this report. Because too often when we talk about parents and families, it's about fixing us. It's about what's wrong with us. It's about, shoveling us into a parent university so you can teach us how to be the parents that you want us to be and how you would like us to present, instead of honoring us as the first teachers of our children. And frankly, many of us who were the underserved children of the previous generation who have deep experience with what is wrong and is really the challenges that we're facing, that we could actually help to inform, so we can do this a little bit differently for our children.
Thank you, Carrie. Patricia, round us out.
So what resonated the most to me was blended pedagogy that combined multiple approaches. And because I also agree that one size doesn't fit all the students, because every student is unique. They bring to the classroom unique personality, their unique strength, their unique needs, right? And I feel like in order to meet those needs, we need to tailor our lessons by choosing the right pedagogical approach. And we do that by observing what we're teaching and who we are teaching to. And I feel like when we choose and when we have the material to actually explore and select the right pedagogical approach, what we're doing is that we are making learning accessible to every child. And we know now in the classroom, when kids learn, they feel joy. The vibe changes because they feel like they can do it. And when they feel they can do it, they trust us. They trust the environment, they bring joy, and everyone is happy. It's a win-win, So I think this one was the one that resonated the most to me.
Absolutely. Michael, you're a superintendent, and in your district, I know you have a child-centered vision. You are working on implementing a child-centered whole child approach. You have multiple dual language schools. You've spearheaded, the development of the state's first public Montessori program. Really talk to us about the nuts and bolts of how you center kids in your schools. What does that look like, and how are you creating the conditions to make this work possible?
One quick thing that we do have the dual language program. I'm sorry, the Montessori program, but it's a dual language Montessori program. So there are other public Montessori programs, but no other dual language public Montessori programs. But that centering children kind of starts. It gets really into the second element of this framework, which is looking at vision, mission, and values. We really center everything that we do around our 5 core values. So integrity, equity. We see those 2 things really present in our work with dual language. We've been doing dual language for 25 years in the most language restrictive state in the country. We're the only ones. We still have English only laws in the state of Arizona, which means last year we were sued by our state superintendent of public instruction for having multilingual learners in dual language programs. Seems ridiculous to the rest of the country, but it's our reality. Yet we still are providing that and fighting that good fight against what we know is not good and right for children. So that being very solid in what those core values are. Growth and relationships are very much present in the learning. And one thing that I was really glad to see bubble up into this framework is the core value of joy. Integrity, equity, joy, growth, and relationships. We are so fortunate to be in this profession that is a vocation. It is a calling to working with children. And if there is not joy in it, then we should not be engaged in it. We need to change what we're doing so that there is joy in the work for the children and for the adults. I think one of the most innovative things that we're doing with that dual language Montessori program, it's really interesting that something innovative that we're doing is based on a 117-year-old method that looks at observing the children and providing them what they need for their development, looking at the human tendencies so that children can orient themselves to their environment, looking at the psychological characteristics of the child so that they can become full social participants and recognize what their cosmic task is. Like this is not groundbreaking work. This is not something new that we need. We need to go back to some of the early roots of education and recognize that it's not about providing all of these things out here. It's looking at children and giving them what they need and what is most natural to them. And even though it didn't start off that way, we can read, Csikszentmihalyi and others. This is very much grounded in brain science that may not have been put into words at the time. So I think that the big work that we're trying to do within our district always starts with that child-centered approach, recognizing who our children are, recognizing who we are, what our relationship with one another needs to be, and keeping the noise away from that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important takeaways is really starting with the child, centering the child. Schools are there for children, not for the adults, not for the test scores, but for what the children want and need. So thank you for elevating that. Patricia and Ambar. Patricia, you mentioned blended pedagogies and talked a little bit about that. In the framework, we discuss pedagogies based on child development, play-based learning, project-based learning, culturally sustaining practices. I'd like you both to kind of just share, your teachers, you're doing the work every day with children. What does this look like in your schools and in your classroom? Whoever wants to jump in first.
Okay. So it looks very fun for the teacher and for the kids. So for me, depends what I'm teaching and who I'm teaching to. I select, for example, I'm going to give an example. Last year, I was teaching this group of kindergarteners, and I was teaching them about animals and their habitat. So we were at the carpet, and this is in Spanish, right? We were at the carpet, and I asked the kids to share their favorite animal and something they knew about them. So Claire raised her hand and said that her favorite animal was the polar bear because they need eyes to survive, something like that. Well, right there, another student mentioned that he went to the library and he learned that climate change was killing a lot of animals. And I could see the face of my students. They felt like, what? What is that? And what is going on? And they were concerned. So they asked me, what is climate change? What was it? Where was it? Was it going to, was going to kill my animal? So right there, I thought this is a great opportunity to do an inquiry-based learning approach. And that was fascinating. It was amazing because I had so much fun. I could see things that I didn't know about them, how much they care for the environment. But not only that, we were able to use other academic skills while learning about climate change, because the process of learning about something, it was, fascinating for me too, because it challenged also who I am as a teacher, right? So I was thinking, how can I help them to provoke the critical thinking by guiding them with questions. So, I had to go back to my Bloom taxonomy staircase and just, bring those questions to a kindergarten level. And from there, just to guide them to think more critically about a specific definition that they were trying to define. And that project lasted like 3 weeks. We ended up doing like a protest around Adams Morgan with posters saying, please don't cut trees. So long story short, I don't have much time, but we started with a question. We did some research, some investigation. We went outside our neighborhood. We collected some data with trash. And sadly, they learned that most of the trash was made out of plastic, and plastic doesn't disintegrate quickly or never. So from there, we used a lot of math skills to make some math, and realized that it was a lot of plastic more than paper. And so in that case, it looks like, in my classroom, it looks like, for example, this project.
Thank you for that example. Amber.
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the main things is when students come to me like in the beginning of the year, right? Like I think at the beginning is where it all starts, is where their trust is beginning, is where the joy is starting to be inhibited. Like students are just trying to really find out what their teachers are gonna offer them, right? Like who are you, what are you gonna give? And so something that we focus on a lot in my classroom is, a lot of schools are like, let's get right into work, right? 8 o'clock, 8:10, 9 o'clock, like, let's get right into work, let's get right into what we have to do. And mine is like more slow approach. Like I want kids to come into the classroom. I want them to talk to their friends about their night, right? What did you do last night? Did you go to a basketball game? Did you, have dinner with your family? And also this approach of understanding that kids don't come to us broken, that they really are full, and that many times the school systems and the systems that we have in place break students. And so just kind of incorporating love and joy as soon as they walk into the classroom, and allowing like fun Fridays, right? Like we don't have to do academic work all day on a Friday to get you to be where you need to be. And just like exploring their joys, like their loves. I used to do like planned field trips for the whole year. And now like at the beginning of the school year, I'm like, where do you guys want to go? Like what are places that would bring your attention? And so, just having them actually be the ones to dictate the learning and what they want to know and how to learn it, and just making it fun, right? Like we sing about everything, like all about math, commutative property, we know songs, right? Distributive property, we know songs. So it's like really bringing joy, happiness, music into the classroom, and letting kids really have a say in what happens every day.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing in, fun, joy, like that's what learning's supposed to be. And meaningful learning experiences about the academic content that you're, teaching kids every day.
I want these folks to be around my kids.
I know,
Where can I sign up? I'm so excited by
Can you
this.
come to Florida? Okay. So, Carrie, can you bring in the parent perspective? I know you've already done that, but bring it in a little bit more for us. And how can parents really work together to create enabling conditions that are needed in the schools via, advocating for policies or at various levels to really implement joy, equity, and learning in our classrooms in a stronger way.
Well, I'm happy to report that parents are gathering all across the country by themselves to have these conversations. We're a collective of about 1,800 of them, but they're everywhere in every neighborhood because we are the community. And frankly, it's interesting how we approach, parent, family, community engagement as if, schools are here to save the community or save the parents. We kind of talked a little bit about this already. And frankly, in the United States, it's kind of unprecedented the way that we do this. We've actually done some partnerships with Brookings and, hearing how, parent engagement is handled in Sierra Leone, where it's actually led by parents and communities about what they want and what they want the relationship to look like. Here in the United States, it's very different, but that's not surprising. Unfortunately, we do have to acknowledge that many of our schools, throughout the history of our country have done deep harm and trauma to our communities. And unfortunately, there has not been a lot of restorative justice around that. So you end up with parents like me. I was expelled from school when I was 15 years old. And so I have a lot of trauma and concern around what is going to happen to my children, and did when they entered, because I found myself with a child who was bright and brilliant, who happened to have autism and ADHD, who was suspended 36 times in kindergarten. So imagine with my own direct lived experience then watching my child. You bet I came in with my dukes up. And I'm not that unique. The push out is very real. There are students like me who are now parents who are expected to engage and show up as if none of that ever happened. And then we wonder why parents are angry or frustrated. We're not respected, our cultures are not respected, our communities are not respected. But there are ways to change this, and that is through processes of restorative justice. And I've seen it happen. Parents who I've worked with in Massachusetts at the King Elementary School, parents who had actually been trespassed from the building because they were very angry and concerned about the fact that their kids were not learning to read. And a language barrier was actually keeping them from conversations. And when you're Dominican and you're upset and your hands are up and you're very fired up, sometimes that can come across, a little bit threatening or make people a little bit nervous. These were parents who were actually, trespassed from the building at one point. We were able to bring them together, actually hear them out, because these are parents who are coming from a place of fear and anxiety that their kids are not going to be okay, and negotiate a conversation and a bridge so that we could have a transformational conversation where we could get the principal and educators to understand that these aren't violent, angry parents or not an angry mob, but really just deeply frustrated, concerned, fearful that our kids are not going to be able to access education and not have economic mobility, because so many of us are still trapped in those same cycles. And that passion comes through, and that anger or that emotion comes from a place of fear. And it is possible to negotiate a better conversation. And now they have a beautiful relationship where they are part of a parent council and are helping to transform and turn around that school that is dealing with some very significant challenges. But that's just one example of how, if we can all kind of put our dukes down, have a conversation. I think it kind of goes back to what Michael was saying. This is not rocket science. These are human being lessons. And if you are a friend before you need a friend, and you engage people with dignity and respect, and don't come to them and say, well, I've looked at your life and decided I know better from my particular lens of privilege, and instead say, I'm here to serve and be a part of your community. Tell me what I can do to help you and your children get to where you want to be. You're going to have a very different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to you, Leticia, online. You've been both an educator and an administrator, and now you're working really from the outside to bring your expertise into school districts. When you worked at Baldwin Hills, you worked with teachers to transform the school design and really center Black students there. The school was recognized under your leadership. Can you talk about that experience for us?
Absolutely. Just going to give a little context of what brought me to Baldwin and how it was just in alignment for the work. As a classroom teacher, I sought to create a classroom culture and space of learning that I would have wanted as a student. I was a Black girl with bright eyes, brown skin, genius and gifts, but in school, those gifts weren't often seen. And on the contrary, children that looked like me and from communities that mirror mine, they're too often ignored, dismissed, passed over, or seen as the exception. So after years of successful and rewarding classroom teaching and learning experiences when I was working on my doctorate, the picture expanded to a full school that would amplify what I saw to be successful in classrooms across a full campus. A community where a family could trust dropping off their baby to our care and we do right by them. And when I envisioned a school community that I would one day lead, all that I thought of was creating a space where I would want my then unborn children to be able to attend. And in my journey, that's exactly what I was able to nurture with the school community, not just being proud principal, but proud parent, because both of my babies went to Baldwin Hills. It was the most loving and labor-filled experience of my career. I was there 7 years. And we need schools to love our children, to see them, recognize their presence, nurture the genius that's inherent in each child, and that centers their humanity. Touching the spirit, teaching the child, recognizing that education is bringing up and bringing forth just the best of who we are, and that self-knowledge is indispensable. That was all part of my rearing as an educator and as a human, and that African-centered view of education with scholars such as Asa Hilliard, Wade Nobles, Tony Browder, Naeem Akbar, et cetera. That's how I showed up at Baldwin Hills. Baldwin Hills, a school within LA that was forced to integrate Black folks in the 60s to white backlash and white flight. Thereafter established a reputation for doing right by Black families. And I'd heard of Baldwin Hills from its centering cultural and linguistic responsive teachings before moving to LA. I'm a Bay Area girl. And it was just in alignment with who I am and what I was bringing by way of background to a school that was looking to self-govern, to have its own sovereignty, that was looking for autonomy to define, create, measure, and have say over what success looked like for its community, by its community. And that's when we came together now 10 years ago in 2014. We need our babies to be seen. We need our babies to be safe. We need our babies to know who they are and with content that's relevant and responsive to who they are, and our babies to know their potential is infinite and uniquely tied to their presence, their gifts, with content that's rigorous. We believe that teachers have voice, value, strength, innovation, and can lead in classroom and across classrooms to support collective professional practice growth and make impactful decisions, for they're the closest to the children. We believe families have expertise, gifts, and bring a needed perspective to likewise make integral decisions for their closest to the children first. And all of those are core tenets developed by us as a school team. And I led with recognizing all members of the school community, being respected and visible, important and acknowledged, knowing everybody by name, all the babies, and building this sense of relationship, shared accountability, shared responsibility, where Black children achieving not a hope, but an expectation. And our autonomies around curriculum, instruction, professional learning and development all relied very much on the fifth indicator within the report, where we were able to set annual goals for our growth within, holding ourselves accountable to those goals. And in some ways, the proof really is in the pudding and feels surreal. For we had to push annually against district practices, political policies, and just some of the systemic inequities and ongoing battling for our autonomies. But if anyone would want to question if standards align, culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogical practices with data-driven decision-making and instructional student groupings, nestled within a community where Black babies are again safe and seen, families empowered teachers valued in the second largest district in the nation. If it can work, yes, it can. We did. Um, Closing the achievement gap. State award, distinguished school, 3 out of 4 Black and brown babies at above near standards in math, 4 out of 5 Black and brown babies at above near standards in language arts. Award winning teachers from both National Board Certified side to Rookie Teachers of the Year with 100% literacy, teaching cutting edge math, professional development across the district, across the state. That light is still very much there at Baldwin Hills and will always be a home for me, my family, countless others. It's truly been a blessing, and the community keeps shining. So
Thank
awesome
you.
work there.
Yeah, thank you for that. Listening to all of you gives me so much hope. And I'm wondering for you, when you think about the 14 ingredients and you think about what you see and know is happening in schools, what gives you hope? Whoever wants to start us off.
I think something that gives me hope is that, like one day, this will be the norm, right? Like this, we won't have to sit at this table. We won't have to advocate for Black and brown, Latino families, other people from different cultures and backgrounds to be welcomed at a table. Instead, it'll be something that's normal, that we'll walk into a school and we'll see kids joyful, happy to be in school, right? But I also, like, something that gives me hope is that, like, just hearing, I'm sorry,
Tanette. Letitia.
Letitia, sorry. I'm sorry, Letitia.
We'll just go through the list.
Just hearing Letitia and, like, being a teacher in DC, I've been teaching for over 9 years in the city. And it's hard when you are a teacher and you see the discrimination and you see it every day. And you are battling or you are going against leaders or going against policies, going against things because you see not only yourself as a Black educator in the field, Black Latina educator, you see that, like, your own children, being a mom as well, right? Wearing both hats, where you have to go in there and advocate and you have to speak up and you have to be like, it feels like the grumpy person always coming in, right? Or you're being told that, like, what you want is not being able to be fulfilled. And I think, like, seeing this and seeing all these people come together, these experts just sit down at the table, is gonna give us hope, like, as teachers, that, like, we will be able to walk into the classroom one day and say, like, this is all we wanted, right? And that also, like, just on the other side, being a teacher too, that I'm able to give kids quality instruction, but, like, do it with love and genuineness. And, like, if I'm loved, then I can give that love. And so, like, just hearing the principals and hearing superintendents that I spoke to earlier today and moms on here advocating and wanting what's best for their kids, I do have hope that, like, my 3 children will also walk into a school and will feel that love, but that I'll be able to be that love for other kids as I continue my teaching careers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
What gives me hope, that I hope we can hold on to, is democracy and society. 90+% of parents choose our public schools, right? They're with us. They want to be with us. They believe in us. Don't believe the narrative. Don't believe the hype that's out there that tries to tell us otherwise. And so that hope in democracy is that as we have choices ahead of us now, that we make wise ones, that I don't have to do this work just as a superintendent or as a principal or as a teacher, fighting for certain policies to protect our kids in schools. We all get to do that in the decisions that we make and who we vote in. And so I want to encourage anyone out there to exercise that right and that opportunity to go out and make those choices so that we can continue to be protected. There are lots of things, I've been at different stages in my career, had the most joyful time as a bilingual and Montessori teacher. I think I had the most important work that I did as a principal of a K-3 dual language school for 10 years. But I think some of the most impactful work that I'm getting to do is what I get to do now as a superintendent. advocating and working on systems. But I do that work in cooperation with parents, with community, with society. And so we all have to, this report, we say it's not rocket science, but the fact that it's not applied, maybe it is. And so I can use this as my guiding light in the work that I'm trying to do in terms of creating systems that are best for kids.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just very hopeful that we have solutions. Like this is not an unknowable thing. We have an entire report that tells us like what basically the map is to fix all of these problems. The real issue that we have is a political one. You know, we are in silly season right now and talking about a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with what is really the point of education, which is getting our kids to a brighter future, getting them ready for the jobs and the economy of the future, to economic mobility, to a happier life, a better life. And anything that takes us, off of the track is just, we don't have time for it. So I'm hopeful because we have a set of solutions. We know what we need to demand. And I'm also hopeful because I see parents every single day. And if you don't see us, please come along with us. I'd be happy to introduce you to parents in every corner of this nation who want us to get to work on the serious things, on the important things, on the things that matter. Don't let the media trick you into thinking that we aren't with you, because we are. That's a hate campaign. That's a political messaging campaign. We're actually wanting you to do this work. We need you to do this work. We have a vested interest in your success. We just want to be treated well and be treated as vested partners in this and critical stakeholders. And I think we can get there.
Okay, thank you. I want to give Patricia and Letitia an opportunity, but I know we also want to get to questions from our audience for you all, so keep it short. Go ahead.
So I think what gives me hope is that eventually we're going to be all on the same page. Principals, parents, politicians, because right now I feel like we want to teach the kid, but the principal wants result. So I feel like eventually, hopefully, we're going to be all at the same page, just for the kids.
Okay, great. And Letitia, let's go to you. Final word.
I'll share briefly that the questions that started us off that Dr. Jeanette raised, are the children well? Do the children feel safe? When there's hurt or harm, how is it addressed? The insertion of those questions into our school climates has been really something that's brought a lot of hope, in that we're shifting practices and engaging in discussions with restorative practices, affective statements across students, across staff, incorporating families, and the insertion of joy into the lexicon, which we've heard a few times today as well. But thinking about a child's presence and having voice and value at school, if they know that, it'll be a joy to show up. If when there's something that's happened between students, repairing the harm and restoring the community with what happens thereafter makes taking responsibility and strengthening that trust a joy likewise. So the shifts in school climate and the incorporation and embedding of staff, I see more staff on campuses now that are there to support the social and emotional wellness of children than I ever have in my career. So the shift in school climates to really center wellness and wholeness of all of our children certainly gives me hope.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we can open it up to questions from our in-person audience, but also I think we can open it up to online as well. Don't be shy.
Well, I can kick it off with the online questions as folks in the room start thinking about their questions. And just as a heads up, the mic isn't, you'll have to emote. It works for the people who are online, but it's not really carrying in the room, unfortunately. How did you narrow down your core ingredients or allow the inclusion of as many as you did to 14? What's with the magic number?
So I think this is a good question for... No, we kept adding.
Well, I think this is the thing that I will say. So the CEP has a lot of things with 14 in it. But a lot of that, yes. However, we did not intentionally say there are 14. We didn't say we want to keep that number. We started off with probably like 6 little buckets. So there were like 6 buckets or so. We know that data was important. We knew that the workforce was important, right? We knew that curriculum and instruction was important. So we knew that families, right, were important from the very start. I'm the director of Parent and Family Partnerships, so that was incredibly important. I hear you, Carrie. And then from there, when we started to host these listening sessions and kind of brainstorming sessions, we started to see that we needed to break some of these down a little bit more. And so, when we talked about, child grouping kept coming up, right? Different elements of that. And then food and nutrition kind of came toward the end. The architecture and design, it helps that on our team we have an architect who was, really pushing around, the physical space. So some of these came from who was in the room and in these conversations. And I think in the beginning, it was not a desire around a number or even thinking about it that way. It was like, let's lay it all out and let's see where we fall. And we kept building from there. But you may want to talk about.
I have to say that bringing our lens as parents helped, right? Because like when my kid would come home and tell me what she had for school breakfast, right? I'm like, we need to talk about food because we have this in common, right? We really care about nutrition and what goes in our bodies and just thinking of that. I will say we visited one of Dr. Robert's, the Montessori, the dual language public district Montessori. And I remember one of the most beautiful moments, we were there for lunch. And it's like in a regular school building that you would see, anywhere across the country, regular lunchroom, with those long cafeteria tables with the benches where the kids sit. But it was so different, just the way that they embedded like the Montessori dimension, the family style eating in elementary, in this regular looking cafeteria that could have been anywhere in the United States. But like 2 little kids had their aprons and they were setting the table. There were fresh flowers, on the thing. They had little pitchers of water. And it was the same cafeteria food that the rest of the district, I'm sure, was eating, which is great. It sounds great. But like, it was a regular kitchen, as you would have, but like they figured out a way to embed this different approach within the structures that exist in a, regular old, elementary school building. So that also, I remember everyone on the team was like, this is so beautiful, oh my God. So then we added, we started thinking more about the food, the nutrition. What does mealtime look like, right? A lot of the things too, like our kids sometimes would come home with their lunch. We didn't have time. We hear that so often. We only have this much time to eat, which then results in you're not allowed to talk while you're eating because you have to eat. And then like all of these pieces like fit together, right? So then we kept kind of expanding little by, we got to talk about recess. We can't not talk about recess, right? So then we had to, incorporate that piece of it. So I think we did have those core initial like 6 or 7 that are obvious that we talk about a lot. And then building out with our experience being parents, with our experiences at school, with visiting schools, these different dimensions that were like, that's really important. If we're thinking of kids as like whole humans, right? Not just students, but like humans. I'm giving and I loved what Dr. Davis said, right? Like, I want to drop my kid off with a principal like that, right? Because saying that they're like, I want my teacher to love my kid, right? Like, I'm giving you my kid for 7 hours, right? That is such a long time for them not to feel loved, right? And for them not to feel seen or heard or embraced or whatever. And so I think we kept kind of expanding in that way, looking at all of the dimensions and the full picture.
And if I can just say, that language is really important because parents and families, we don't have students, we have children, and it's really a mindset shift when you start realizing that these are children. Students are a part of, being a student is a part of who they are, but it's their children,
Any other in-person questions? Otherwise, I've got a list of online questions. Okay, Kara's saying no. Any more in person? Okay.
And I believe you touched on this a little bit on the report, but I wonder if you could just expand on it. We talk a lot about, the child-centered approach and the child perspective and the child transition. But it really is, and I think it's where you ended up so nicely. It really is like a whole family transition when you go to an elementary school, or when you go like, we say in my house we have two houses. We have our schoolhouse and we have our home house, and it's important that our kids feel just as safe in our at school as they do in our home, except for it's not a parent's home. It's like, so how do you does the report address, or does framework kind of talk about how the school can incorporate the whole family, or the whole family approach, or the whole family transition to a school, because it is a transition for the whole family, and a school should be, that community center that the whole family is a part of. So I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a little.
Start with a quick example, and then I want you to answer. Because Tanette has a lot to say.
I'm just gonna keep it to a minimum.
I'm gonna give one little example, starting as a kindergarten parent, right? In preschool, you walk your kid and you give your kid to the preschool. You go to their classroom, in kinder, we started on the first day and it was a car line. I was like, my kid has to just get out of my car and then go where? She doesn't know where her classroom is. Is someone gonna help her? There were 6 strange adults she had never met. I had never met, helping with car line. And she was so nervous. That was the most anxiety-provoking piece of the whole experience, being like, so after school, I just find your car in the parking lot? What, right? And all of these pieces are such a shock, and it is such a family, right? A whole family transition. But I know you have a lot to say about
And I'll try to be brief because I want to make sure we get to these questions. But 2 things. One, Baldwin Hills, when Dr. Davis was there, first day of school, you were going to hear some music that was familiar to home, whether it was the music that you heard from your mother when you were growing up, cleaning. It was going to be a good time, extremely welcoming. And what I will say in the report, we don't explicitly talk about transitions, right? From when you kind of started a school, so it's not explicit, but it definitely gives examples and talks about what it looks like for schools to actually belong to families and communities. So it explicitly gets into that. We highlight a school that's actually a Keres language school in New Mexico that is doing really, really phenomenal things, because there's stuff around attendance, right? When we talk about attendance, it gets very tricky. When we think about, right, this community and family partnership, there are many, many examples, but yes, the report does. It talks about how all kind of things, how we set up parent-teacher conferences, right? How we decide to share information. And I think Carrie hit on that, where it's typically these are things that are decided by other folks and parents. The engagement is that I comply, right? And so in the report, we really do try to push against this idea of compliance and what it looks like to get deeper into relationship. So doesn't explicitly talk about transitions, but definitely gets into how schools, not only that they need to engage families, but that they should see that schools belong to the community. So that's really the message there.
One key piece of that, when you're talking about home family and school family, it's so interesting, how we don't realize how we treat that school family and how that feels very, again, transactional. There are schools across this country where you get a letter home, during the summer with a lady's name on it. You don't know anything about that person, and you're just supposed to drop your child off for 6.5 hours. You don't know who that person is. I think about when we have our babies before they go to school, the investigation that goes on before you give your child to a babysitter. We have background check, all kinds of stuff. I don't give my children to just anybody. I know who that is, and but when it comes to school, we don't start from a place of let me introduce you to the person who is going to help to guide your child every day for hours on end. I love these teachers. I want to know more about you. I would like to sign my babies up for your classes. But you don't know. You just get this sheet. You don't know who that person is, why they're an educator, what they care about, what their style is, where they went to school, how much experience they have. It's just, come sit down.
And I do want to highlight, there is some schools that are doing a lot of work. I know DC pulled, during the pandemic, it was a big move with home visits. And I absolutely love them. For 6 years of my career, I was knocking on people's doors, they would welcome me into their house. They would have dinner sometimes. They would have just good vibes where you actually got to see somebody's house outside of school. And that was such a beautiful thing. But I think, again, as we talk about policy, we talk about what's happening, that's being removed, right? Paying for teachers to go outside outside of their contracted hours to go meet families is something that's also a challenge, but it's a beautiful.
Yeah, no, it was. And also gave us an idea of what those kids were. Because some kids, they live with other families in one-bedroom apartment. You have 2 or 3 families. So then you can understand why they behave the way they behave or why, etc. So it was a beautiful experience because you got to see more than just academics. But also, it was like modeling families what it meant to meet in the middle, right? Because it's not just the teacher's job to do their 100% and go all the way to their families. It's like the kids is in the middle. We both have to meet in the middle. It's 50-50. And the parents need to feel safe that they can come to us, right? And vice versa.
Well, and I would also highlight, like, thank goodness you guys are who you are. And it actually highlights the importance of having diverse educators. Because I'll also tell you from a parent and family perspective, like sometimes that can be scary when you have a teacher at your door and you don't know if they're there to judge you. Like, the departments of children and families have been weaponized by school systems in the past. So that's a trusted thing where a family is willing to open their door and welcome you in. Like they are, like that at some points in some communities can be a huge lift. So like this is the importance of like making sure that you have teachers and educators that understand that and are reflective of the children that they are serving so that you can actually build some of those relationships because it can be very complicated.
I think we have to wrap it up here,
Yeah,
right?
we have a hard stop at 3:30, but I'm wondering if we can have maybe like 30-second closing remarks
Yes.
from both Dr. Meek and Dr. Powell.
And while they are approaching the podium or coming to the front, can you just join me in thanking our awesome panel here? Thank you so much.
I want to thank all of our partners. I want to thank the administration again for being here, for providing this opportunity. This is just the beginning, right? As we've already talked about before, we have this vision, we set up this vision, we didn't create it alone, we created with a whole lot of people and a whole lot of experiences pulling from. And now we have 5 years of a new center that's going to help us make it a reality. So,
Yeah. I guess, just to close this out, first of all, thank you all for being here. I know that it takes so much of everybody's schedule to make something like this happen. So thank you, and thank you, New America, for, letting us use this space and for making sure that folks who could not physically be here are able to access this event. But I'll just end on this thought. Recently I asked all my kids, tell me what you think I do for work. And they never know. And nobody in my family knows. But my youngest son, he said to me, he's 9 years old, he said, after a lot of guessing, he said, I think your job is to make sure that everybody's okay. And I would dare say to you that when we think about this work, when we think about why we're all here, whether virtually or here physically, that we want to make sure that kids are well, that they're okay, right? In order to do that, we have to be willing to be bold. We try to be bold with this framework, not as a cookie cutter, but as a baseline of what every young person deserves. Thank you for helping us do this work together. We got years. We want to look back 5 years from now and say that we push things forward and not backwards, right? That we were able to really center learning, joy, and equity. And we need everybody to help us do that. So thank you so much.